So I thought it was important right off the top to kind of mention that this project is very much limited in its scope for what it is. And I wanted to make sure that everybody who's here today kind of understands that going into this presentation today about what exactly the Kinship project is. So there's a couple of definitions here for what it is. A centralized place to store data that characterizes clan descent of Mohawks at Grand River and also the Bay of Quinte, which we'll talk about later. To confirm clan family affiliations and to trace the path of a clan family's ancestry to the Mohawk Valley. What the Mohawk Valley Kinship Project is not is a study or a source of generalized genealogical records of Grand River Mohawks. And it's important to make that distinction because this project is so specific in its mandate in the fact that it's looking at and researching and tracing our clan families in order to assist with clan families in terms of rebuilding, in terms of healing, in terms of revitalizing our culture and our rights as citizens and people who have clans, and to just find out a little bit about who it is we are if we're finding our matrilineal descent. So if you have Mohawk ancestry, it came from Mohawk Valley. Like I don't need to tell anybody whether they're Mohawk from the Mohawk Valley. If you have Mohawk ancestry, it came from the Mohawk Valley. And so I can for sure, if you have Mohawk ancestry and you want to learn more about it, it for sure came from the Valley. But if you're looking for generalized records on genealogy, that's an important distinction too, is this is not genealogy. I don't know what the word is for it professionally, but so far I've been calling it clanology. But if you're looking for genealogy, there are some great resources for Six Nations. We're some of the most studied Indigenous people in North America are right here in this territory. I guess some of the sources that, if you were just going to ask, if you were to ask me what I think would be helpful in terms of looking for the generalized information of clan or Six Nations genealogy or genealogy at Grand River, these are some great sources. Ancestry.ca, great resource. We do, for your information, have free access to it because it is something that you have to pay a subscription for. But right here at the Six Nations Public Library, we have free access to Ancestry.ca. So if you don't want a subscription, to pay for this subscription, but you're local to Six Nations, all you need is a Six Nations library card. So grab your library card and come and access that free resource that we have here. Also, the Ashwegan does have its own genealogy society. They do regularly meet in person. Since like the pandemic's over, they're starting to meet in person. And they do have a Facebook group, and I suggest that you connect with them because they have a lot of awesome information. And then finally, the Ontario Genealogical Society does have a branch, a Brant County branch in the city of Brantford. I've been there once to hear a presentation before, but they do have access to online records, which are awesome. If you can't, a lot of stuff that's on Ancestry, you can get it from the Brant County Genealogy branch too. So going furthermore into what is the Kinship project, the purpose of it is to provide sources for tracing our Mohawk clans at Grand River and then Tyendinaga by association. What you're going to find is the more you do this research is that it's really difficult to, you can't separate these two communities. Mohawks have been intermarrying between Bay of Quinte and Tyendinaga like right from the get-go, like there was no delay in terms of intermarriage. So if you're studying clanship, it's gonna include Bay of Quinte as well. And then finally, tracing those clan connections to ancestral communities in the Mohawk Valley using publicly available records. So far, any information that you see in this presentation is not something that you can't find yourself. And so I'm just more or less, spending my days with it. And I look at a piece of information, walk away from it, I come back to it later and think, where does this fit in how it's developing the project? And what I'm finding with the project too is I've kind of separated it into two categories, which is pre-1885 and post-1885, and that's very loosely speaking. And this presentation, for the most part, is going to talk about pre-1885 when it comes to our research. 1885 isn't a foundational year because we have this document that I wouldn't say everybody knows about it, but a lot of people do. If you're doing a study of genealogy at Grand River, clan genealogies, this document, it's called the Seth Newhouse manuscript, and It's just a couple of pages within a larger tome that Seth Newhouse created. It's really a 300-ish page ledger of stuff. Like Seth Newhouse, like he wrote down the creation story, aspects of the Great Law. He wrote the High, and he kept Confederacy Council minutes in this manuscript. But among these papers that he has is this document or a couple documents from August 4th, 1885. One is this clan mothers roster, and the second one that he created was also a chief's list. Let me see. I just had my computer tell me that my internet might be unstable, so if you can't hear me, let me know. And I'll say that before moving on. Hopefully it'll be okay. Got that res internet here. But so this is the document that a lot of people today in Six Nations might know or refer to when they want to talk about clan ties. This initially served as a foundational document for because of how well known it is. Its reliance as being like the only quasi-official documented clan mothers and chiefs list for any Haudenosaunee territory for that period. It makes 1885 a foundational year and reference for a study in clanologies. And again, not genealogy, it's not the same thing. Because we have a pretty good documentation to rely on for the women that are on this list here. And I'll be talking a little more about like how it is that they're split up. But for a lot of these women, like we do know that they exist through Canadian federal census records starting in 1851, Mohawk Chapel records starting in the 1830s. But those records together do, when we're talking about clanship on this list and how these women are recognized as clans, these records do start to come with their own problems when you take them at face value. And the more like through this project developing, just there's a wide breadth regarding like how we identify by clans and by nations in Six Nations, and it becomes apparent the more you kind of like use this document, the Newhouse manuscript, and kind of use source material, things like the census records, and then what it is that we can find in the Mohawk Valley too. I'll talk more about these records later, but I just wanted to point out like early on in the presentation that the Newhouse manuscript was related for the beginning of this project, but we've been able to see a need and understand that there is a context and backstory that comes with this record that needs to be understood when diving into who these women are on this list and why they're placed on the list and who decided to place them where on the list. And so let me see. I keep forgetting the buttons are different on Zoom compared to, I keep thinking I'm on a slideshow, but I'm not, I'm on Zoom. The buttons are in different places. Okay. So this very first, I wanted to start off the top by just kind of telling a story that's kind of come out to me, and that's important, I think, to share in a couple of different ways in terms of, where this project is really tracing us back to as not as Haudenosaunee, but as Kanien'kehá:ka people. And I wanted to start with this story for this one lady named Margaret, who comes to us from the Kanajohari, and she's wolf clan. Johari or Ganajoharege in the Mohawk language is the Upper Mohawk Castle in the Mohawk Valley. But I'm just going to read something that I kind of wrote in terms of her information that I want to share, and it's her story. So, the experience of Mohawk women in the 17th and 18th century Mohawk Valley was one marked by hardships and resilience. Their commitment to family in the face of disease, war, and political hostilities is the principal reason our nation exists to this day. Margaret of Kanajohari, the mother of Joseph and Molly Brant, can provide us with a glimpse. And there's a reason why I chose her. Margaret was raised a Wolf Clan resident of the Mohawk Castle of Ganajoharege. She was married sometime before 1741 to Peter and may have been married at least once before him. There's evidence that she may have had 3 children baptized at Fort Hunter in the 1730s and 40s, including Molly. In 1741 and 1742, she had 2 more children with Peter, named Jacob and Christina, who both died in infancy. The records are clear of rampant disease manifesting itself in the lives of Mohawk people in this time. By the 1750s, most outlying villages became ghost towns as survivors made their way to the 2 remaining castles at Ganajoharege and Tondaroga. I know it's a Jonundaroga in Mohawk, I'm trying to understand if the anglicized version is Ticonderoga. I need to brush up on my English. Not long after the death of Christina, so her daughter, Margaret becomes pregnant with what we determine is at least her fourth child, possibly fifth. And she leaves the Mohawk Valley for the Ohio Valley on what a lot of historians and writers seem to call a hunting trip that would last 2 years. So the loss of children and the escape of disease seem to be more plausible prompts for a pregnant mother to relocate so far to the west. Joseph was born in 1743 in the Ohio Valley. Not long after, his father Peter died of disease, leaving Margaret with 2 small children surviving, and the choice to survive the Ohio Valley and the rising hostilities surrounding the French Indian Wars alone, or to face disease with at least some protection of kinship in her homelands. Margaret returned to with her children to Canajoharie, or Ganajoharege. She would remarry at least once during this time. So with her new husband, whose name is Lycus, she would bear 2 more children, Jacqueline, born in 1747, and Leah, born in 1750. And both of them would die in their infancy. Tragedy would strike again as Lycus would perish in a war raid against the Catawbas of the Carolinas. So raising her young children, Joseph and Molly, in Canajoharie, she would become a highly successful ginseng trade in the ginseng trade, which made her independently wealthy before her marriage to Brant Ganagaradonkwa, a Turtle Clan chief and widower from Ticonderoga, the Lower Castle. Brant would become the adopted father of Molly and Joseph, founding the surname Brant for the family. Brant and Margaret would have 1 son, Jacob, together. So that's my write-up about Margaret. So why is it that I'm deciding to talk about this lady? 2 really important reasons. Well, 3, I would just say. The top one, I guess, is just the fact that Joseph Brant and Molly Brant make it easy. Like, we know a lot of their history. That's why we actually know about Margaret. And so we're fortunate in that respect to be able to put together a case study or a story of a real Mohawk woman with a Mohawk experience in the Mohawk Valley in that period, who isn't Molly Brant or who isn't, Catherine Brant. And but my big 2 reasons about why sharing this story was important. One is I cannot figure out how she didn't go insane. How did she keep it together with the amount of loss that she experienced? So the story that I just told you tells us that she was married at about 5 times, at least 5 times, and she's had at least 7 children. She might have had 8. So there, like, documents vary in terms of what truth it is that we know, but about 7 or 8 children, about 5 husbands. And every single one of these people who were important to her, they were her family, they were people that she loved, they were living and breathing and existing for her. They all died except 2 of them. So this is Margaret, and she's the mother of Molly Brant and Joseph Brant, and she was able to somehow survive all of that and be able to bring these 2 children up with her. And I just thought that was, like, I don't understand how she kept it together, but she did. But the second reason why it's important for me is related, is that her story is not unique. She's just a case study of the experience of all Mohawk women in 18th century Mohawk Valley. This is not a unique experience at all in terms of the loss that you're hearing about. Like, she travels to get away from disease. She travels again to get away from war. All the time she's got children to think about. And so if we want to talk about the story of what it's really like for Mohawk women to, experiencing life at this time period, this is a story that's important to inform that, but it's also informing us moving forward into understanding what clanship is for our people and how chronologically it's affected over time. When you're studying or getting to know and understand clans in the Mohawk Valley, something that's important to remember is that clan is almost intrinsically tied to place. So if you're, depending on what clan you are, turtle, wolf, or bear, you're for the most part probably going to be from some specific village or castle in the Mohawk Valley, up and down the river. So in a lot of historical records, our communities are described as castles or as towns. So that first terminology I have there is the word castle. It just means a principal town of a clan. So a castle would have many villages associated with it, where smaller families and groups would live, but those families would come to and rely on this castle for trade, social gatherings, and for protection. Because in certain periods, castles would have palisades built up around them, so the large wooden fences that would be populating the area all the way around an entire town. Those palisades are actually the reason why the word castle started to be used to describe what what settlers, or what, the Dutch or the Jesuits or the Germans or the English, what it was that they were seeing when they came to the New World. They didn't have a word for what it is that they were looking at in front of them, which was basically a Haudenosaunee village, but the words they started to use was castle to describe those palisades. So Upper Mohawk and Lower Mohawk, these two definitions, like we hear them a lot because people who have status in Six Nations of the Grand River, if you have Indian status from here, a lot of us are considered Lower Mohawk or Mohawk. These are official bands here. And as far as I can tell, the origin does come from the fact that there's Upper Mohawk and Lower Mohawk villages in the Mohawk Valley. So being Upper Mohawk or Lower Mohawk would refer to the portion of the river that your family originated from. Many Lower Mohawks tended to be turtles, and those are the ones that lived closer east or closer to Albany, or the original Dutch colony that kind of popped up Albany. And they would live in the castles to the east. So a lot of times on old maps, you'll see like first castle and second castle, and they would kind of populate, from east to west. But first castle and second castle are often referred to as principal turtle towns, and then Lower Mohawks lived further west on the river. So like if you see a third castle reference, it's often referenced as a principal bear town, or fourth castle is the wolf town, and so that's how you start to see like the origin of being a Lower Upper Mohawk. It kind of depends on what part of the valley that your family was from, how it is that we kind of are identified today. A lot of Lower Mohawks went to Tyendinaga, and Upper Mohawks came to Grand River, and those almost seem to be like some of the definitions of how these bands became like named or identified, or whatever you want to call it, over at the band office. So upper and lower, when you hear these words, they are not in reference to downstream or upstream on the Mohawk River. So they do reference the valley and being being along the river, but it's no reference to upstream or downstream, because the Mohawk River actually empties towards the Atlantic, so eastward. So if we would consider what, in that sense, you would think, oh well, west is upstream, but it's not. It's down. It's Lower Mohawk. So it's actually a reference, I think, from the Atlantic Ocean from where settlers are, that further down into the Mohawk Valley you go, then you're going lower. If you're closer to the coast and to where the Dutch colonies were, you're an Upper Mohawk, and then the farther into or lower into the Mohawk Valley is when you start to see where these upper and lower terminologies are coming from. So in 1756, it's a pretty interesting year. Like, we're going into the French Indian Wars in that period. But by this point in our history, 1756, there's two principal Mohawk castles, and so I'm not going to say most, I'm going to say all Grand River and Bay of Quinte Mohawks are descended from one or both of these castles. So a big part of the project is kind of determining, well, what are the likelihoods that your clan family comes from this specific castle or that one. So Canajoharie is, to the west, it's the upper castle. Closer to the Albany, or towards the east, you have that Janundaroga Castle, or Tondaroga, Fort Hunter. And so a lot of people from that castle ended up going to Lachine, and then ultimately the Bay of Quinte. But again, it's very loosely, like it's a I don't want to say it's a what's less than that. It's a guideline. If you're from Tyendinaga, chances are you came from Fort Hunter. It's a guideline. If you're from Brantford, Grand River, then your ancestor is most likely came from Canajoharie, but like I was talking before, there's so much intermarriage between Tyendinaga and Grand River almost immediately. Um, really following your clan lines is what's going to ultimately determine, again, it's more of a guideline, it's not a rule. Just the odds are greater that if your line is completely from Grand River, you're probably Canajoharie. If your line is completely from Tyendinaga, you're most likely from Fort Hunter. So this is just kind of like I'm going to break this down a little bit more over the next 20 minutes or so. In the whole time that I've been kind of focused on this project, there's definitely, and so like I was talking about, 1885 is a foundational year for this project because that's when the Seth Newhouse clan mother roster was compiled and put together. But there's so much context when you're going back into our history, and then you think of this piece of paper that Seth Newhouse and I can describe how this piece of paper came to be. It was the Confederacy Chiefs Council convened on August 4th, 1885 for the purpose of compiling an official list of the clan mothers and people who were clan mothers and had those maternal or rights to certain clan families. Something really important to understand about that meeting was, one, none of those men in that room were genealogists. Two, none of them were clan mothers. And three, there was a purpose for it, and it had nothing to do with clanology. And I'll go more into the purposes, but it had everything to do with how land theft was occurring and how the undermining of our sovereignty and the Confederacy Chiefs Council sovereignty as a government were being affected by burgeoning acts and that were coming down the pipe from the Canadian federal government. So there's a lot of context and reasons behind that specific roster, and almost none of it had to do with clan family genealogy or understanding who we are as Mohawks from a clan standpoint. And so I have here like 6 waves of information. I was trying to simplify as much as I could, but it's all stuff that has immediate impacts on how we understand ourselves as clan people. How we understand and basically how our clans were formulated and ended up in Grand River, and how you ended up with a bunch of women on a list, but not the other women. There's 1,000 Mohawk people at that point in Grand River, but we only have a couple dozen women that are on this list. So, something's changed in terms of what's kind of happening with our history. And so I just kind of want to break down the chronology of the entire thing here. I have the right slides for me. Okay, so this one slide that we have here in 6, I've kind of have it broken down into time periods to take into consideration. So this is going back to the 1630s when in terms of talking about chronology, but it's even earlier than that because we have before that Dutch people coming in, we have settlers coming in. There's all kinds of a history going on before the 1630s. Something that's significant about the 1630s is a huge wave of disease that comes through our territory at that specific period, whether it was I want to say it was smallpox or cholera, but I think at that period, smallpox was the issue, where you're having entire swaths of villages that a white man has never seen, and people living in that village who have never seen a white man, and yet they're dying of white diseases. So I know I was reading a narrative by a guy named Vandenbergen, and he was a Dutch guy who came through, and I want to say 1635, through the Mohawk Valley, and he basically kept a firsthand account of everything that he saw. Like he kept a journal while he was there, but he was just talking about entire villages where nobody was there. It was all graves, and how some people are kind of clustered together in other villages. And what he was basically describing was, seeing villages that were empty because of disease, and he came through in the winter of 1635. Also happening in our politics of the period in the 1640s, where we were having constant warfare here on the One Dot Confederacy. So that was something that we always had. We always had an economic competition with them, but it really started to when the beaver trade started to really blow up. That's when it got really serious. After like Samuel de Champlain comes through, there's a story of him, his party shooting and killing 3 Mohawks, and on his side he had Huron guides with him. And then it just kind of blew up from there, and it stopped being an economic competition, and it started to be full on warfare. So the Huron One Dot Confederacy collapses in 1649, and what's significant about that from a clan genealogy is that, one, we lost a lot of people to disease and warfare with the Huron. So something that our people did to remedy those losses in population was we assimilated and adopted a lot of Huron. So a lot of our people were replacing members of their family with captured Hurons, and you were having entire clans of Huron and sort of becoming assimilated and becoming Mohawks. And I don't have a Mohawk account, but I do have one written down somewhere of I think he was a Jesuit, and he was coming through an Oneida town. So he was in Oneida country, but the period and the circumstances all match up. Where he was visiting Oneida towns, and he was saying that about 2/3 of the people in these Oneida towns were of Huron One Dot descent. So of just how many of our people were being replaced in terms of their bloodlines, and kind of genetically they're actually One Dot or Huron, and but they become assimilated and absorbed and become Haudenosaunee in that respect. In the 1680s is when we start to see not the beginnings of church records, but I guess reliable, like the ones that I have been keep track of and use. They seem to be popping up around the 1680s for the time period. And then in 1712 is when you start to see like the first real settlers starting to come into the Mohawk Valley. And we had Palatine Germans come in at the time. And it was interesting where they actually came to the Mohawks and asked for permission to settle in the valley. And so that was something that the Mohawks consented to at the period. But so the 1720s and 80s, you start 280s, like you see in the 20s, a second wave of those same German people, a wave of Scots-Irish coming in the 1730s and 40s. I put Molly Brant and Joseph Brant's birthdays here. 1735, Molly Brant's born. 1743, Joseph Brant is born. The reason why I do that is to give a sense of like what the Mohawk Valley that they were born into. To give you an idea of like, of all the information that we have that's most reliable in the Mohawk Valley, centered around Joseph Brant, and I want to give you a sense that these aren't people that, Joseph Brant never knew a world without white men. That's a fact. The Mohawk Valley was being populated, and him growing up, seeing Germans around, seeing Scots, Irish, that was perfectly normal for them. Mohawk Valley by that period is a multicultural place. And even Molly Brant herself marries an Irishman. Sir William Johnson was born in Ireland. And so to give you a sense of like how the world that it is that they're growing up in. And so we kind of know our history from there. Like if you know a lot about Grand River history and Tyne-and-Aga or the rest of it kind of moving forward, we have the French Indian War in 1750s, all the way through to 1783. So look, 1754 to 1783, that's about a 29-year time period where we have almost constant war. Completely constant. Joseph Brant was 13 during the Battle of Lake George, which was in 1755. 13 years old was his first war, and we know that. And so all the way from the time he's 13 to 1783, like this boy has never known a year of peace. And this is the kind of life that we're kind of, are we really, thriving, or are we just kind of existing, at this point? And so we know that what are the things that happen after revolution, like we're us being up here in Grand River in many ways we are refugees of war. When we came up here because the situation in our own homeland was so bad that we had to become dispossessed of it. We had to remove ourselves from it. And so a lot of things kind of fall by the wayside when in times of hardship. We know that when people are struggling through war and through devastation, through starvation, through disease and epidemics, a lot of it, like you have a breakdown in your society at some point. And so one of those big breakdowns that we have as people, like especially from the American Revolution, 1760s, leading to our moving to the Haldeman Tract, we lost a lot of records. We have reliable records in the Mohawk Valley. We have reliable records in Grand River, but there's about a 40 to 50 year time period that we don't have a whole lot of reliable information in. So from the 1780s to the 90s, that's when you have this. We start to know now that Canajoharie, the Upper Mohawks, are leaving for Grand River for the most part. Again, like it's a guideline, it's not a rule. 400 or the Lower Mohawks are leave and head to Lachine, and then ultimately the Bay of Quinte. And then you have this intermarriage and movement that I have here, like I'm just mentioning, almost from the get-go. Like there was no period where like, oh, for an entire generation, we didn't marry into Tyendinaga. We were marrying and moving back and forth between the two communities almost completely instantly. And it's the same way how we existed up here from the 1780s onwards, even to the modern day. It mirrors exactly what our existence was in the Mohawk Valley at that period. So replace Grand River and Tyendinaga with Canajoharie and Fort Hunter, and you have almost the exact same relationship between the two. They mirror each other, you know, from where we were then to where we are now. And another interesting note is 1783, that's when the Mohawk Chapel of Brantford was founded. Interesting to note though, actually that's wrong. I have records beginning 1820s. Is that 1828? I think it was, but basically most reliably 1830 and onward. That's when Mohawk Chapel records actually begin. 1828, 1830, that time period. And the reason why that's important is to just point out here that 1783 was when the chapel was founded. So there is, you know, 20 something years, over 20 years of time where we didn't have any of these. We don't really have records for what was going on in the chapel or the village at the time. And I think at that period, it was because we didn't have a permanent minister. So I think in the 1820s, 28, moving on, that's when we actually got a formal minister who, you know, he lived in the village and worked here, and that's what he did for a living. Before then, I think from 1783 onwards, I think it was more informal, like ministers would come and visit and do marriages and baptisms and all that stuff. But for the most part, I think services were basically just Mohawks reading out of a Bible. So kind of really informal, but the existence was there. And that's what that, like if you're looking for chapel records, that's probably for the reason why this chapel is so old, but we don't necessarily have records that are that old. So going into the 1800s, so this is 1800s to the 1830s. Something that's important to remember, to point out by the year 1800, so that decade, what is it to be a Mohawk, or what is it to be Haudenosaunee here at Grand River at that period? Because we do know today we have a band council with membership. You know, how are you people are either band members here or they aren't. So what was it in the year 1800? So in 1800, we had land grants here, and we were also getting annuities, which is like the annual distribution of funds and resources to the households all up and down the track. And so your membership as a Six Nations person, like if you have rights to lands and if you have rights to annuities, your right to those things was simply determined by, it was informal. You lived in a household where the head of the house, where if you're living in a house that's full of Six Nations people and you're on the Haldimand tract, then you're a Six Nations person. So very informal at that period. You'll start to see over time why or how that does change, but like just make a note around this period, that's what it is. If you live in a household and on the Grand River tract, you're basically a Six Nations person. Six Nations people weren't the only ones living here, so I'll get back to why that's important. So War of 1812 is when we start to see Akwesas Herdono, Gasadage Herdono starting to show up in the Niagara region, because they did have war parties that came from out east to fight in the War of 1812, and a lot of them did settle finally in Grand River. And going through this project and all these clan genealogies, you start to get a sense of how important it is to understand that bit of our history, because a lot of our, like, when I get back as far as I can to in a clan genealogy, because the ultimate goal with all of these genealogies is to try to connect them to the Mohawk Valley. And so I would think they go from Grand River to the Mohawk Valley. But then when I look at it, suddenly the oldest lady on it is a St. Regis Indian. And that's the same thing for Tyendinaga. There's some families there that also have a St. Regis Indian or something. And so where did these random St. Regis ladies come from? as far as I can tell, my ongoing theory is that they are women who are the descendants of men who fought in the War of 1812. So when you say that somebody's a war party, it doesn't just mean a band of warriors. A lot of those men brought their families with them. So you do have families from out east that are, living and existing along the Niagara frontier while this war is going on. And some of those people stayed, some of those women stayed, and we do have their genealogies that are starting to pop up in this project. 1815 is an interesting year for us too, because that's the earliest list of chiefs that exists. And as far as I can tell, George Martin is he's a Pine Tree chief. I can't remember if he is himself a chief. He's a Pine Tree chief. But he does work for the Confederacy Council, and he keeps minutes, and he's the guy who kept this early list, and which has been helpful for trying to make sure that I'm on the right track. Like, can I figure out if these men are somehow connected to these women? So like that, the list has been helpful in that regard. And then in 1835, what's in that period of the 1830s, you have this burgeoning Methodist movement that's occurring in Southern Ontario, and it's already established in Grand River, but it's starting to kind of pick up in Tyendinaga. And so there's about a dozen or so Tyendinaga families remove themselves from Tyendinaga, and they move to Grand River because of this Methodist movement. They come here because they just want to be able to have fellowship with people who are already part of an established movement of Methodism. And so there are documents that we have, like, they're really cool to look at, documents of Tyendinaga Mohawks and who they are and how many came in their party to Grand River in that period. So by 1847, this was something that was a surprise to me, but I learned it through this work, is how early on patrilineal membership occurs at Grand River. So that question is probably always at hand, is when did we stop being a matrilineal people in terms of government, and when did we become patrilineal? As far as I can tell, it starts as early as 1847 within Grand River, so that the HCCC, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council here at Grand River, adopts a patrilineal membership policies, but they do it to combat British property rights. So kind of going back to, remember I was mentioning back in the 1800s, that basically your membership as a Six Nations person was just determined by you live in a house in the Haldimand Tract. It was really informal at that time, and you would have access to lands and rights to annuities based on how many were in the household. But what we were finding over time from the 1800s to 1840s is that we had non-Haudenosaunee, non-Six Nations men, I'll say, living here. So that was whites or British, Scots-Irish. There's some Afro-American families as well. And so we had men that aren't Six Nations men. Oh, and I'll say too, not Six Nations. So this could be a man from Oneida, the Thames, could be from Tyendinaga, it doesn't matter. Just non-Six Nations men. That can mean Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to just be clear. But at that period, you're starting to see these men marrying our women. And so there's stories at that period of men that are non-Six Nations men who are trying to sell land along the Haldimand Tract. And when the Confederacy Council tries to block sales that these men are doing, the men would start to make the legal argument that I'm a British citizen, and then and I have property rights under British law. And so when Six Nations Confederacy Chiefs Council are starting to find having to combat these men, they realize that they only, however legally they have to combat these men, they have to make it make sense in British law. And so that's kind of the reason behind why they started to determine membership from a patrilineal standpoint. So it wasn't just kind of like a random change for no reason. There was a reason for it. It's because our land was being sold out from underneath us, and land grabbing was happening. And so that's the 1800s is just a complete history of our Chiefs Council and our clan mothers, our governance structures, just trying to keep it together when so much of their land is just being disappeared, left and right and center. And so that's ultimately what informed this patrilineal membership policy that takes place here. And so Mohawk Chapel records, even when from this point, 1847, a lot of people, what you'll find when you look at Mohawk Chapel records, both baptisms and marriages, is that people's nations will be written down as well. And they are kind of reliable in the beginning. So when you're talking about if a woman is say so-and-so, Seneca, the groom, so-and-so, Onondaga, Mohawk, whatever. So earlier on, but then as this patrilineal system starts coming in from a band point of view as a Six Nations people along the track, those official records are starting to impact how things are being recorded in Mohawk Chapel records as well. Women are becoming listed under fathers and husbands' nations in tandem with this new band system. So we're effectively enfranchising ourselves without realizing it. So at this period, our membership is patrilineal, but our clans, our chiefs are still kind of sitting there by their maternal clan. So there's starting to be like this kind of, you can start to see how there's an imbalance like starting to occur even as early as that period. Confederacy Council passes in 1847 membership rules that excluded all but descendants of Six Nations men and their spouses from lists compiled by civil clan chiefs and overseen by Confederacy or Royaner. Patrilineal lists, I have a quote here from a really awesome dissertation. These patrilineal lists were used to determine membership for annuity and landholding. Matrilineal affiliations remained informal in the community, permitted one to live on the reserve, but had no part in their right to partake in annuity or to hold land. One sentence there, it really sums up what's happening at this period for our people too. And then we also know a little bit more on a national scale what Canada's doing. In 1857, you have that act to encourage civilization of Indians. There's a couple of different acts that are similar. Then 1876 ultimately is when you have coming through. And so, but Indian Act creates a patrilineal sense of membership across Canada. But I wanted to be clear that it was actually a lot earlier on for Six Nations people. Got my notes all over the place. I just want to make sure I got them right. Okay, so finally, 1883 and 1885, this is the summation of what we're kind of getting up to. So some really damaging, I think, things that occurred was in 1883, children of non-Six Nations and children born out of wedlock also become excluded from membership. So why is that important for us? It means that we've lost an entire generation of children, Mohawk children with clans in this period. So the important thing is, I say here, children of non-Six Nations men. It doesn't mean that they're white. It doesn't mean that they're anything. It just means they're not from Six Nations. You could have children where their dad was from Oneida of the Thames or from Tyinega or Ganawage or whatever, but because their dad's not from Six Nations, these children lose citizenship as Haudenosaunee people, even if their mother is, a 100% Mohawk woman from Grand River. And that's also, goes a step further with children being born out of wedlock. It gives you a sense of just how closed in the Confederacy Chiefs Council was becoming at that time. They're trying to combat land theft and the loss of resources and the burgeoning of our population, trying to figure out how it is to keep a balance between how little land we have left and how many more people we have at this period. You can see they're starting to panic and create all these kind of dumb rules that have nothing to do with who we are as Haudenosaunee people. But like that 1883, it stands out to me. In a really sad kind of a way, because essentially, who knows, we probably had an entire lost generation of children because of that, who just don't feel like they belong here anymore because of this policy that went through with their membership. 1883 is when we have a marry out, get out policy focused on Six Nations women as well. And then finally, August 4th, 1885, Seth Newhouse sits down with a bunch of chiefs at Confederacy Council and they create a roster, which becomes the kind of quasi official document that tells you who the clan mothers are. And so this is where my chronology ends, is with 1885, because a lot of the times, when I started this project, this was the starting point. But when I put this presentation together, I was able to make it the end point, because there's so much context that I've told you about going back to the 1680s on my chronology, but it's actually a little earlier than that. It's 1630s actually, to get us to this point here to decide, well, who then ended up on this list and why. That all of that had everything to do with what's going on with this list here, but take it a step forward in the fact that the Confederacy needed this together, or why they put it together in the first place. It was because at this time, as early as the 1880s, even earlier, we saw the Indian Act coming in. They knew what was coming down the pipeline from the federal government. They knew, like, ultimately, we know as history goes that in 1924, they become forcibly removed from the council house by the RCMP, and a federal Indian band election system was put in place. But so that happens to us, to our people, but there's so much happening in the meantime leading up to that period. And one of the significant indicators of that is this document, this Seth Newhouse manuscript on this chiefs and clan mothers list. There's two lists that he makes, a chiefs and a clan mothers list. But when they put these lists together, we have to understand then the reason for it, the why behind it. It wasn't because there was some particular interest by this group of men of who the women were. They put it together because they needed to make some sort of case for their special status of their governance, of their government. We have a government, it's valid, here's how it works, here's who's in it, here's who has a right to put a chief in place. They had to be able to answer these questions at this period. And so Seth Newhouse, kind of made a point of putting these things on paper, and he even comes up with the idea to create the very first official written Confederacy sanctioned great law recitation. So he starts it, he doesn't finish the great law he creates his own great law publication, but the official chiefs list one, he started it, but he didn't finish it. He had there's a whole drama there. We could go into it a lot. But essentially, he was kind of putting documentation or things on paper for our government to create a sense of legitimacy of the government. And that's what these lists were for. It had nothing to do with trying to determine something that was of benefit to our people. These lists weren't meant for us. They were meant for the federal government as evidence that we have a functioning government and here's how it functions. So lots of stuff going into this document. And so the document itself, though, like with all that information, just letting you know, and then combining it with information that we can determine from the Mohawk Valley to today, basically you have to look at this Newhouse manuscript at face value, and then realize that there's more behind it. So what I have here is a small portion as an example. So these are the women that are put up into the position for Sosko-Hordone, which is a Mohawk Bear Clan title. And so on the left here, I have taken at face value. If you just look at the list for what it is, Sosko-Hordone is a Mohawk Nation Bear Clan family title. The women listed below are carriers of this title, and their matrilineal female descendants are therefore members of this clan family. The reality, when I look into the genealogical aspect of what clanology is, there are discrepancies on this list. So on this list, you can see I have in blue down there, at least half of the women in this family aren't even bears, not just Sosko-Hordone, but they're not even bears, they're wolves. And I can even trace what kind of wolf they are. They're Jim Hekwa. And to give you a sense that these lists, this is kind of like, this is just one clan family, and there's 9 of them for the Mohawks, and like I've been kind of picking them all apart as time goes along to just give you a sense of how complicated this all can be. But I'm gonna try to start blast through from a bunch of this. So this right here is an example of what the trees look like if you were to come to the library today and look at a tree. So the Sosko-Hordone Bear Clan, I just thought I put a screenshot here. So we do color code them, or I'm starting to color code them better now. So like red, I'll kind of use to determine, like if you're looking at it from far away, you can tell that those are bears. In blue, they're wolves, if I can determine it. In green, they are turtles. And then you can go up a little closer to look at the information itself. But and then in yellow, you can see there, those are people that I've been able to confirm they're sanctioned as chiefs, clan mothers, or pine tree chiefs. And so remember what I was mentioning before, that between the American Revolution and leading up to the beginning of records here in the 1850s, the reliable census records and stuff, we have like this 50-year gap where we don't know what what our people were up to. We don't know who they were marrying. We don't know who they were, where they were born, how many kids they were having. We don't know anything about baptisms. But so there is a gap that makes this work between the Mohawk Valley and between Grand River and Tyendinaga a little bit difficult. But there's some gaps. There's some ways that our traditions have been able to fill gaps for me from a standpoint. And a big one has been keeping track of hereditary names. This is an example here of one name, Sagoyang Guardado, that's been determined or proven to be used by men in the Mohawk Valley. So we have two of them here. Peter Brant, who was one of the 4 Indian kings, and then Hendrik Peters. They're members of the same family. And then we know over here on this side, in Grand River, we know that John Smoke Johnson had the same name, Sagoyang Guardado, and he was a member of the Bear Clan. His sister was the clan, and his mother were the clan mothers for Sosko-Herdowani's family. So we know that these 2 gentlemen in the Mohawk Valley were bears, and we know that in Grand River, this guy was a bear. They all have the same hereditary name. They are all bears. You know, the odds are like 95%, pretty high that they are the exact same clan family. And so in this way, our keeping track of our hereditary names, our traditional names by clan, oral traditions, like in some ways, this is how our culture is filling gaps in ways that records have gaps in records, essentially. And so that list, let's see, this Seth Newhouse list right here. I went ahead and typed it out. I kind of got busy with it and have been able to slowly over time start to pick through what all of these women are. These are the list. Like there's 3 wolf, there's 3 turtles, and there's 3 bear clan women families. And so I have them all categorized, but I'm starting to kind of show you the discrepancies and just kind of what I'm starting to discover. And I'm keeping track of them on a spreadsheet like this. This is just a screenshot. So in these ladies that are highlighted in yellow are from Tyendinaga for sure. They aren't the only ones. There are more. I haven't finished those trees though, so I haven't updated this list. I will when that research is done. I kind of focus on a lady, and then and then I kind of mark her off in a certain way on this draft here. The ladies that are all in red, as far as I can tell, do not have modern day female descendants, so their clan lines are extinct. As far as I can tell, like I'll never say 100%. If I see documentation that proves otherwise, then I will update this list. But I'm not focusing them because, as far as I can tell, they don't have descendants that would be using this list essentially. The other thing you'll notice too is I have a bunch of ladies in blue, and I have like at the ends of their names in brackets like O and T. Those are all ladies that are deemed. This is how they're listed by Seth Newhouse, but from my research, I'm finding that they belong somewhere else on this list. So to the far right, under Sosko-Herdowani Bear, remember I was saying half those ladies don't even belong in this list. They're all Jinhekwa. So I highlighted them in blue, and then I put like a capital T behind their names to just let you know which wolf clan they are. So they're Sardonhone, Aronet-Goa, and Jinhekwa. And these women, as far as I can determine, they're actually members of the Jinhekwa family. And wolf. Sardonhone, there's a bunch of ladies with O's and T's in their names. So they're listed as wolves, but as far as I can tell, they're not listed under the correct wolf name, just based on research and consultation with the families. So the O's actually belong under Ronet-Goa, and the T's belong under Jinhekwa. And there's just records and through records and consultation, I've been able to determine that they actually belong in different aspects of this list. And 1885, Seth Newhouse manuscript doesn't actually have listed under Jinhekwa. I don't know why. There is disputes that are happening. I do kind of know why, but talk about that another day. I'm just trying to blast through all of this for you guys. I got so much information, I would get you through them all. But that being said, so knowing that some of these women are not listed in the right places, another thing that Seth Newhouse manuscript is important for is clan names. So every clan has a list of names, but like women's names and warriors' names, which is cool. So kind of what are in the baskets for these specific families. The problem with it is now that we know that the Newhouse clan mother roster cannot be taken at face value, more research needs to be done as to whether these names also need to be investigated in terms of their accuracy. If we have all these women that are bears, but they're listed as that are wolves, they're listed as bears, does that mean that their names are also incorrect? The tough thing with how Newhouse kept track of these names is that he didn't keep track of English names as well. If we had an English name beside it, like that would have been so helpful. But because we don't, a lot of this, there's a lot of like really special investigation that's going to have to really happen with these clan lists to determine, you know, are they all where they need to be. Something that was really cool that I found by E.M. Chadwick. This is a guy that was writing in 1897. He's the first person I've seen write down clan animals in a document. And I don't know if there's other places, like I feel like there probably is. I just don't know. But it's the first time I've actually seen like the type of clan that a clan actually is. So again, like there's 3 turtles, 3 wolf, and 3 bear clan families that we know of. And in 1897, Chadwick, he spent time here in Grand River, and he took and he kind of wrote a book about what it is that he learned while he was here. And this is what he wrote about the clan families. So I have Degarde Hoga's old snapping turtle clan. Ayanwata, those top 3, Degarde Hoga, Ayanwata, and Sat Degarde are the turtles. And so they graduate in terms of the type of clan. So you know that Degarde Hoga is at the top, it's old turtle clan. Below it, Ayanwata is young turtle clan, it's snapping turtle. And then Sat Degarde is it's small turtle clan, and I'm trying to I don't know what Chadwick means by that, but he probably means a painted turtle if it's a small turtle. The next 3 are Sardon Hoanage and Hekwan Alonet Goa. So you can see there he wrote long-legged wolf, bush wolf, and wolf cub. Like there's no such thing as a long-legged wolf. The only thing I can, like in terms of being a species, the only thing I can think of is that he's just referencing it being an adult wolf. You know, just their legs get kind of long, dangly, right? I don't know if bush wolf means a wolf, or maybe if it means fox, if it means something else. Wolf cub, for the most part, to me means the same thing as, like, you know, if Sardon Hoane is an adult wolf, then the Ordonet Go is the cub. I think there's only one species of wolf in New York that's indigenous to New York State. Like I was looking into it, but it is something that I could definitely use some consultation on. Because if there's only one species of wolf, but then we have 3 different clan families, there's different ways that they're being characterized here. And then finally, the bottom 3 clans, the Hanagariene, Hostawasardunta, and Soskohardoane, are the bear clans, and it's the same thing. You have large or old bear, bear cub, nursing bear, so even smaller. It's got to be the same species of bear. You know, I think brown bears are indigenous. I think black bears. I don't know a lot about animals, but if they're indigenous to the Mohawk Valley, the chances are it's the same animal. But we're talking about their relationship between the clans. It almost goes by age. So like the top family is the oldest family, and they treat the other ones in terms of how they counsel as being like younger brothers, or I think in some sense that this is how it's being reflected in the clan animals themselves. So I thought this was interesting. And there's so much, I'm just gonna blast through all this because I want to make sure you guys have time for questions. There is all kinds of great information about adoptions as well. Like here's an example of Sir Will Johnson being adopted. He had a Mohawk name. There is an entire write-up by this guy named James Smith, and he writes up almost verbatim like what his experience was being. Actually, I think I'll go right. Got so much to share with you guys, but I also want to give you guys questions or a chance to ask questions. But like I have a firsthand account of what exactly his adoption was like, how the women put him into the river and how they dressed him and took him into the council house, and he smoked a pipe with them, with the men in the of the family. And let's see, I'm just going to look at the verbatim. The chief at the end of his adoption announced, "My son, you are now flesh of our flesh and bone of our bone." And so we assume that this firsthand account from another guy was probably similar to the adoption that William Johnson would have had. And if you're a fan of the Netflix series Outlander, that exact adoption that I'm talking about, this James Smith guy, his adoption that was in this account. So like if you get this book, this is a book, Mohawk Baronet, biography of William Johnson. This account is in this book, and it's actually reenacted on the Netflix series Outlander for the character Ian Fraser Murray, and it's pretty interesting to just see how Netflix went ahead and recreated this adoption. There's other versions. I have 3 examples of female adoptions, and the reason why I use 3 is because they're from every clan, but they're also women that became clan mothers for Mohawk people. So this Anna here, this is just a picture of a random Mohawk woman. It's not actually her. But Anna was believed to be either a French girl or a Huron Beaver Clan girl. We don't know for sure. We just know that she wasn't Mohawk, but when she was adopted in, she ended up becoming adopted, and ultimately she becomes Ostawansarlunta Bear Clan mother. And on the left here, this image is of Colonel Guy Johnson, and behind him is David Hill. David Hill is the maternal he becomes chief Ostawansarlunta for that Bear Clan family, but he's the maternal grandson of this Anna, who was potentially a French girl or Huron Wanda, just she wasn't Mohawk. Another adoption, so that was a Bear Clan example. This is a Wolf Clan, Jianhekwa, Wolf Clan mother. Catherine Rolston was actually German, and some people say Dutch. I prescribe to German more just based on the time period. There was way more Germans in the Mohawk Valley than there was Dutch at the time, so I think she was German. The name Rolston is actually English, so I don't know where that came from. I wanted to kind of follow up. Was she Dutch or was she German? Let's look up the history of Rolston as the last name. Turns out it's from England, so she must have been mixed. I don't know. But she becomes the most senior member of the Wolf Clan, and by the time she's in Grand River, she is the Mohawk clan mother for the Jianhekwa Wolf Clan, and she's the maternal grandmother of George Henry Martin Johnson, who is Pauline Johnson's father. Like, we know that George Johnson was he was a Wolf Clan chief on the Confederacy Chiefs Council, but this is his maternal grandmother, was this lady that was German. And you see a lot of write-ups about him being Dutch, about it being Dutch through his perspective, but I think she was German myself. Lots to talk about there. And then finally, we have a Turtle Clan adoption as well. So this lady named Elizabeth, we don't know what she was. We just know that she was an adopted daughter. She was an adopted daughter of a wolf, of a daughter of a clan mother of the Digarihoga family. If you kind of look at this picture, you have at the very top Gardanundo Lydia. She's a clan mother, and her second daughter adopts Elizabeth. So this Rebecca adopts Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is the adopted older daughter. So Rebecca actually does eventually give birth to a daughter named Rebecca. She names it her biological daughter, after herself. But you can see that Elizabeth still becomes the clan mother because it didn't seem to matter to Rebecca that she had an adopted daughter. This daughter was still her child, and so they kind of, it gives you a sense of how adoption is regarded within our Confederacy. Like, we do see this account earlier from like that William Johnson account where the chief says, you know, my son, you are now flesh of my flesh, blood of my, or bone of our bone. That kind of stands here as well. So this Elizabeth is actually the maternal grandmother of Catherine Croghan. So like this is just a picture of their family tree or whatever, but Catherine Croghan, like her claim to fame is that she's a prominent Digarihoga Mohawk clan mother and the wife of Joseph Brant. He gains a lot of his political influence because of who he's married to, this Catherine Croghan. But even Catherine Croghan herself comes from an adopted line. We're not sure where Elizabeth is from, if she was already Mohawk or Huron or what she might have been. She was born in about the 1690s. So I can just skip through that. Project update, because I think that was just wrapping up, but you guys remember what I talked about. Project update, we have 16 clan trees that are available at the library that you could see today. Just wanted to mention that. I have 41 clan families that are currently in the research stage, and we did 2 public viewings in December and February, and did a presentation at University of Buffalo in April. And if you would like to see if we have information that is relevant to you, you can email foundation@snpl.ca, and we will email back to you this piece of paper called the information request form for you to fill out. There's information again right there, which you can probably put to the chat later, but I want to stop share because I do know you guys probably have questions, and I'm going way over my time here. I wanted to see, okay, I stop sharing? Trying to fix my screen though, so now I can see everybody's beautiful faces. There you are. But yeah, so I think that was everything. I don't know if anybody had any questions they wanted to ask, or I just wanted to make sure that I left some time at the end. Just kept going and going. Let me see. There is the chat box here, but I don't know if I'm 7:15 now. If anybody had any questions, I think from the project, just a lot of information there. We have all the trees and a lot of information that is specific, like when you go there to the trees, to the library itself. I wanted to use the presentation today to kind of contextualize like what you would see if you're looking at these clan family trees. Because there's so much going into it, and I didn't realize it when I was first starting this project, but going into just finally just kind of diving in and realizing, okay, we're going to trace all these clan families back. And the first thing that it started with was with this 1885 account from Seth Newhouse. And but when you're reading that, I've always known about that document, but I never really had anybody contextualize it, or I don't know if people take it at face value or if they look more into it. But there's just so much more packed into it that you really need to understand about, like, how did we get from 1630s Mohawk Valley to a piece of paper in 1885 in terms of trying to understand who we are as Mohawk people. Like, we aren't a piece of paper. We're not. But also the Mohawk Valley Kinship Project is not meant to replace people's stories here as well. If I tell you information or discover information that's you didn't know, or that's might resonate with you, like it's not meant to replace what you understand about your own family story, like that your histories are yours and they belong to you. And let me see. That's not questions popping up. So any info on Wanda among Senecas? I don't know anything about Senecas. If there is, I'm sure that there's lots, but yeah, that's from David. I couldn't tell you anything about Wendat and among the Seneca, except that there is going to be prolific amounts, because the Senecas were the ones that, for the most part, were at war with the neutral and the Huron up in this region here, because we're closer to Seneca territory here at Grand River than we are to the Mohawk Valley. So there's definitely assimilations of Huron into Senecas at that point, but I'm just not an expert in that regard. Olivia, curious if we have any idea how old Margaret Brant was while she was going through all that hardship. I want to say she was born in the 1712-13 area time, so 1712, and then like Molly Brant is born 1735. I think that's right. So like she is like 20s, 30s. Like she did live to be, like, I don't know how old she lived, but she did grow to be a grandmother and married so many times. So I couldn't tell you for sure what her ages were, except I think I saw written down that she was born around 1712, 13 that people can find. Do you research other nations with clans besides the Mohawk? No, just a simple, not that I don't want to, it's just that I had to start somewhere. So I started with my nation. This project could get really big. I would love for somebody to come on and say, hey, I'm going to tackle the Seneca. Like I'd be like, climb aboard here. Here's my resources. There's no reason why the project has to limit itself to the Mohawk clans, except as like I'm the one person focused on it. And my original thesis was going to be on the clan families of the Mohawks on the Seth Newhouse manuscript. You mentioned that this is not genealogy, and I feel like I understand that, but wondering if you could describe clanology, as you call it, just the study of where folks were from. Clanology, just simply for the context of Haudenosaunee Mohawk people at Grand River, because I'm not representing everybody with what I'm doing. Clanology is just simply the study of the matrilineal lines of Mohawk people. And that's all that it is. Like, because genealogy is it's wide. You're trying to find out where everybody came from in your ancestry. This is just following the female line. If you want information on female lions, like that's what we focus on. If you want to know about your mom's dad's mom's dad's dad, like I could not tell you where to start. A lot of our focus isn't on male lions, except when I know that I'm trying to connect a couple of trees together. Like a lot of times when I'm starting to find men, when you look at the ancestry trees that I'm creating, I have the woman and what clan she is, and you can see it because she's populating and her ancestry on the tree. But I'm starting to find that I could figure out who a lot of the men are too. So I'll put the father as well. So like you probably won't have anything about his ancestry, but if I can find out that he's he's Junheko, I'll write it on there. And so that's kind of the closest I'm getting to the men. It's not all the men, it's the husbands and the fathers, basically. Well, fathers, I'll say. Being married isn't necessarily important. but the fathers anyway. So I'm helping out in that area too. But clanology, I would say it's not the same thing as genealogy. Like I cannot get into the breadth of genealogy, but we do have lots of good genealogy sources, resources in this community too. Like if you're looking for them, again, like the Oswego Genealogy Society, Ontario Genealogical Society has a Brant County branch that has resources that are useful for Six Nations people. And then also just at the library here, we have a free access to ancestry.ca if you want to use it without having to pay for it. I don't know if anybody else had any questions or if that was good. I keep thinking I have a text from Manada, but it's from a while ago. But yeah, so I think if that was everything for today, want to say thank you everybody for joining today. Hopefully my presentation was of use. I had lots more information too, but it's hard to get it all out in all my notes out in just an hour for sharing all this stuff. But yeah, it's at the library. Again, email me if there's some kind of information about your maternal line. Like try to give me as much information about your maternal line or a maternal line that you're looking for as you can. Like the form will kind of explain that to you, like how to write all that stuff down in a way that's like I can try to just see what if I have something that's of use to you for any information that you're looking for. My email, that's my email. I had it on the last slide too.
Foundation.
Yeah, foundation.
At snpl.ca, I think.
Mm-hmm. I keep thinking of Feather's email. Director, no, languages, no, wait, no. Which one's mine? Foundation. Foundation at snpl.ca, and I'll be able to forward you a copy of like our information request form that you'll be able, it'll help guide you to help me figure out how I can help, if that makes sense. But yeah, so unless anybody had any questions, I think that was everything. Unless I could wrap up with the adoption. We do have a couple minutes left. Because there was a firsthand account that was written about an adoption in Mohawk Valley, and I thought it was really nice to, and maybe I will read it out loud just so you can hear about it. And again, this was not William Johnson, but it was another European man that was adopted by the Mohawks, and it was actually supposedly recreated in Outlander, like the Netflix series. And I never seen it, but my sister said it's a thing. So it goes. Let's start. Okay, so this is his firsthand account. After the neophyte, I don't know what a neophyte is, had stripped off his clothes and put on a breechcloth, Braves drew on his face and body designs of various colors, put a large belt of wampum around his neck, silver bands on his wrist and right arm. Then an old chief shouted, "Ooh-wee," several times in quick succession, which brought all the inhabitants of the castle at a run. They gathered around the chief, who made a long speech very loud. Then 3 young squaws led the future Indian into the river, plunged him in and washed him, rubbing, as our informant wrote, severely, yet I cannot say they hurt me much. These young women then led me to the council house, where some of the tribe were all ready with new clothes for me. They gave me a ruffled shirt, which I put on, and also a new pair of leggings done off with ribbons and beads. Likewise, a pair of moccasins and garters dressed with beads, porcupine quills, red hair, also a tinsel laced capo. They again painted my face and head with various colors. They seated me on a bearskin and gave me a pipe tomahawk full cat pouch, which had been skinned pocket fashion and contained tobacco and kilagnego, or dry sumac leaves, which they mix with their tobacco, also spunk, flint, and steel. When I was thus seated, the Indians came in and dressed and painted in their grandest manner. As they came in, they took their seats, and for a considerable time there was a profound silence. Everyone was smoking. At length, a sachem announced, "My son, you are now flesh of our flesh and bone of our bone." And I don't know what year that source was, but the source material was from 1870. James Smith, remarkable occurrences during his captivity with the Indians. So, yeah. But I think I ended up with that. That was just like a really nice story I thought to hear of. Just like, that's the first time I've seen any ceremony written about, like from a first-hand account in the Mohawk Valley, and it happened to be an adoption. So I thought that was really interesting about that. Oh, it says neophyte, a person who is new to a subject, skill, or belief. Well, there you go. Now I know what a neophyte is. But yeah. So if anybody had any questions, otherwise, thank you for joining us today, and I hope maybe to do a public presentation of all this material here in the village sometime soon for people who want to see it in person. I'm still just kind of updating and seeing what's the best way to put this information together, and what do people actually want to hear about, and see if I can keep it at an hour. So I'm still building on that presentation, but any feedback that you have, or if you want information, just email me, because all of it's helpful, and I'll do whatever I can to help. But if that's everything, I just want to bid everybody a good night, and thank you so much for joining us.